Hey, what's up? My name is Trent, and in this video I'm going to give you 5 practice tips that can help you improve your rhythm in your guitar playing, and not specifically rhythm guitar playing, but just overall rhythm. And these are different things that you can use in your practice in order to improve your rhythm. So they're small changes in the way you think about practicing certain things like scales or chords or arpeggios that could make a big difference in your playing. And the reason that I am showing you this is because rhythm is, to me, the most important element of any player's path. Working on their rhythm and improving their rhythm over time is one of the most important things that someone can work on. And that includes you, and that includes me. And I've been working on my rhythm really hard for the last year, really focusing in on it, and it's really reaped great rewards. I've focused on rhythm to different degrees in different parts of my playing journey, but this last year has been a really intensive dive into it for me, and so that has been really good. And I want to share some of the things that I've been doing that have been working and that you can implement very easily into your playing and your practicing in order to see good improvements, I hope. So anyway, the first one is kind of obvious. Maybe it's obvious, but I really think a lot of people, including myself, don't always do this, and that is playing and practicing everything in time. And I have 2 caveats to that I'm going to share with you in just a minute. But first off, I just want to talk about how I think about this. I think about practicing everything from chords for a beginner all the way through very complicated scales and transcriptions, whatever you're practicing. If you're creating a situation or a loop, an exercise, something that you can do in time, that is going to lend itself much more directly to what you're going to have to do in an actual playing situation. So if you're practicing scales and you're changing the timing, you're not thinking of an even time signature, let's say, or what subdivisions you're playing, you will build up skill in the actual dexterity of playing the scale, but the application of it is going to need an extra step, and you're going to have to translate that into a rhythmic context that would work over an actual piece of music in a live music type of setting. So if you practice everything instead by creating rhythmic loops that are complete ideas, then you're setting the foundation for not having to add another step on to your learning. If you're already learning your scales from day 1, or whatever day you're at now, if you haven't been practicing this way, if you are learning and practicing your scales in time in a closed loop, or your chords or arpeggios or whatever it may be, you're going to more easily be able to apply them to your playing. And so one example of how to do this would be take a major scale. If you're playing an in position G major scale that stays here at the 3rd position the whole time, if I play it just all the notes up and down, as you might when you're first exploring it, you might not be thinking of the timing in which you're playing it. But if I deliberately think of how I'm playing it and play it in time in a full rhythmic cycle, it would be like this. I could do it one way would be like this, I'll say. So I could think 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And I've created a full loop. I was playing 8th notes, and I played it in this position all the way up and down, and it ended up being, 4 measures long. Sorry. So it's a 4-measure pattern, so it's a complete loop. And playing in that way gets me used to starting and ending on a strong beat like the 1, and gets me used to playing that scale in a musical context. So the first one, like I said, just to repeat, is to practice everything in time. And this is the overarching one, and that's why I'm telling you first, because you should be thinking of this as you're going through the rest of these and as you're practicing anything. And the 2 caveats I have to that rule One would be when you're first exploring a new scale or a new chord or a new arpeggio pattern. I like to sit with one. If I'm learning, say, a new scale, I'll try it on one string. I don't necessarily need to do it in time at first because I'm trying to get my ears to hear the intervals of a new scale. That's part of the challenge of learning new scales is being able to hear those intervals. So I'll do it slow, out of time, and explore that new pattern. And then when I get used to it enough to play it in time, then I create exercises that are full loops like I'm talking about. So that the first caveat is when you're exploring something brand new, a brand new chord or arpeggio or scale. The second caveat is for more advanced players. If you're practicing specifically playing out of time and playing freely as an effect that you want to use in a song, that's a different thing, and that's a beautiful thing to practice and get good at. But that falls outside of the rule of practicing everything in time. Anyway, so those are the two caveats. So the tip number 2 or the practice tip or practice idea that's next is to practice changing between time signatures in the same exercise. So if I take that G major scale that I just showed you, before I was playing it in eighth notes, so I'll in 4/4 time, and this time I will play it in eighth notes again, but in 3/4 time, and see where it ends up. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, on the fly, just make a little, try to end it and continue playing the scale until I find the strong ending point, the one of the 4 measure cycle that I'm playing. So I'll count it out. So 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So I just created an 8 measure cycle using that position of the scale. I changed it to 3/4 times, so 3 beats per measure from 4 beats per measure. And so that changes the mathematics of how all the notes line up. There's still the same amount of notes in the octaves, but then you saw I went up the scale, back down the scale, and then up until I was going to reach the next strong downbeat, which would have been the beginning of the 9th measure. So I was at the end of the 8th measure, and I ended at the beginning of the 9th measure on the root note, finding a way that I could close that rhythmic loop. So moving between time signatures forces you to try a different way of playing the same pattern in order to fit it into the amount of time that's available in that different time signature. You can do 3/4, you can do 4/4, you can do 5/4, 6/4, 6/8, if you know what those things are. But to start, if you're not familiar, if it feels intimidating to go to 5 or 6, just go back and forth between 3 and 4, because those are simple, easy to count. And a side note for all of these, I use a metronome in my practice in a lot of different ways. I'm going to share a couple of the ideas for a metronome at the end, but you should be practicing with a metronome, especially if you have access to one, and if you're newer in your journey. Let's say you've been playing for between 2 and 10 years, or 0 and 10 years, you just started, or you've been playing for 10 years. Even beyond that, you should be practicing with a metronome most of the time, because your internal clock is probably not super reliable until you've trained really deeply with a metronome and focused really deeply on your rhythm. So I use a metronome app on my phone. It's called Metronomics, and it's a great app. There's a lot of free ones. This one is paid, and it has a lot of fancy options. But the basics of what you need is just one where you can adjust the tempo and hit start and stop. That's pretty much all you need. So that takes me to the third tip, and this one is the second one was to move between time signatures. Well, the third one is to change the subdivisions that you're practicing something in. So a subdivision is, I think of subdivisions as the ways that we're dividing up the beats. And the beats are the pulse of the song or of the practice we're doing. So we're dividing it into different parts and increments. So to start, you could do quarter notes. You could play quarter notes, and then that's going to end up being pretty slow at most tempos, but great for if you're learning, you know, a new chord, especially. Chords at quarter notes are good. Or a new scale, you're just getting used to it and going nice and slow. Quarter notes. So what I like to do is to do an exercise where I start in quarter notes and then I subdivide down. I go to eighth notes. So let's say I would do 8 beats or 2 measures of 4 beats playing quarter notes, and then I would move to eighth notes for 2 measures and then move to triplets, which would be 3 notes per beat. Eighth notes would be 2 notes per beat. Quarter notes would be 1 note per beat. And then you could move back down from triplets to eighth notes to quarter notes. So I'll try to demonstrate that on that G major scale that I was showing you. Okay, we'll see what happens. I haven't tried this before on this exact scale, but here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm in quarter notes. Now I'm going to go to eighth notes. Now triplets. Eighth notes. Quarter notes. And so I don't know if I did that perfectly, but that's just an example of an exercise that you could do utilizing changes between the subdivisions as a way to increase your speed and get better at a faster subdivision without increasing the tempo of your metronome. I just did that at 100 beats per minute, and I went quarter notes, eighth notes, triplets, eighth notes, quarter notes, and I tried to do the same amount of time on each of the subdivisions, both on the way up and back down. I don't know if I totally nailed it, but I think that serves as an explanatory to show you kind of what I mean. So, number 4 is to add rests. And this is a way of just varying the rhythm that you're playing as you're practicing. So you could choose a beat on which to add a rest, choose multiple, or choose a specific rhythm that you're going to use to play the scale. So back to the G major scale that I've been doing, I'll do eighth notes at this tempo, 100 beats per minute, and I'm going to add a rest on each third beat. On 3, so I'm doing eighth notes, so I'm playing 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and I'm going to put a rest on each third beat and see what happens. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4. So notice how I just finished in a complete idea there. I was just trying to find an endpoint that worked at the beginning of a big phrase, or at the strongest downbeat, which was usually at measure, you know, after the 4 measures, 8 measures, 12 measures, 16. Anyway, but by adding that rest, I've changed the entire trajectory of how that scale ends up playing out across the neck, so it ends up being a totally different exercise than just playing eighth notes steady up and down. And it's a great way to vary what you're doing and get you moving towards more the type of phrasing that you'd use if you were improvising in a live music scenario or playing with friends, where you're going to be creating rhythms on the fly and adding rests and varying rhythms and stuff to create interesting ideas. So that brings me to the final practice tip that I have for today in this video. And this one has to do with metronome use and creative ways to use your metronome. So you can obviously just turn on your metronome like I've done and have it pumping quarter notes at you. And that's a great way to really get used to playing in time, especially, depending on where you're at in your journey, it can be really great. Or if you're practicing a really challenging rhythmic passage and you really need that steady beat in your ear so that you can play the rhythms more precisely, you may want that really strong quarter note sound. But there are many other ways to use a metronome, and I'm just going to show you one idea, a couple of ways to apply one idea, and that is, instead of having 4 beats per, let me say it like this. Instead of having a pulse with your metronome on every quarter note, try dropping it to half notes or whole notes. So meaning you get with half notes you get 2 clicks per measure, and with whole notes you'd get 1 click per measure. So I've got my metronome here. Let's see if you can see that. Nope, you can't see that. That's okay. I've got my metronome at 100 beats per minute, and I've been doing quarter notes. But I'm going to drop to half notes, and so I'm going to drop the time or the beats per minute of my metronome in half and do the same, because I want to do the same timing to show what I'm talking about. So if I'm now at 50 beats per minute, and I think of these as half notes, then I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and I can practice my scale just the same as I did before in eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and so on. And what this does is it forces you to feel the space where beat 2 and 4 would normally be. So you're hearing 1, 2, and you're feeling 2 by yourself. Then you're hearing 3, which can kind of recalibrate you in case your 2 was a little off, and then you're feeling 4 by yourself, and so on. And this way you build more of a deep ingrained sense of time that can help you improve your rhythm in the long run big time. And so the other way to use the half note in a 4/4 measure, what I just did was on beats 1 and 3. If I think of it as beats 2 and 4, it changes the way it feels quite a bit. So now listen to this. So I'm going to turn on the metronome at 50 beats per minute, and I'm going to think of these as my beats 2 and 4 of the measure. And this is always was a little tricky for me at first to get into hearing it right. But what I do is when I hear one of the clicks, I just say 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. So you notice how I got into that by just counting the 2 on one of the clicks and then approximating my 3 and then listening for the 4, and that aligns me properly. So again, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So that is using half notes. Now using whole notes is going to be slightly more challenging because you're only getting 1 click per measure. But to do that, I would slow down my metronome to 1/4 of the original speed. So instead of 50, I'm going to go down to 25. And I'm still going to be playing at 100 beats per minute. I'm just going to be thinking of this as a whole note. So 2, 3, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm trying to calibrate. It's more challenging, but I listen for that click. I try to feel the space in between the two clicks, and then I start filling in the subdivisions. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm not always on. I'm still. This is something that takes quite a bit of focus for me to stay on, perfectly. So definitely a helpful thing to do, though. So here's practicing the scale with this. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I don't know if you noticed, but as I'm playing that, I'm kind of listening for that click each time and kind of adjusting my time slightly because it wasn't perfect, in case you were paying attention and noticed that my time, wasn't perfect there. My time isn't perfect, and, I'm working on it a lot because it's super important, and that's why I wanted to make this video for you. These 5 tips are my best idea at how to communicate to you what might help you work on this element of your playing, which can be a little bit illusory and hard, and maybe not something that people talk about the most. I certainly don't talk about it as much as I should, and maybe I'll just make more lessons on specific practices and things related to rhythm and how to improve your rhythm. But just to review the 5 ideas that I'm sharing with you, the tips that I shared with you today. The first one is to practice everything in time, from chords to scales, arpeggios, everything. Figure out a loop that is a specific amount of time that you can practice to with whatever pattern you're working on. Number 2 is move between different time signatures. Try playing your pattern in 3/4, 4/4, or other time signatures, 5/4, 5/8, 6/8, and beyond, and just to give yourself a little bit of variation in the way that the pattern sits in the time signature. Number 3, move between subdivisions. You can move between subdivisions as a way to increase the speed of what you're practicing without actually increasing the tempo that you're playing to. And then also feeling different subdivisions in different time signatures is really helpful for just fleshing out your rhythmic understanding better so that you're more prepared for more different situations. Because if you're playing 16th notes in 3/4 time, it's going to end up feeling a lot different than triplets in 4/4 time. So trying those different combinations is a great way to get a little more juice out of what you're practicing with your scales or your arpeggios or chords. Number 4 is to add rests. So by adding rests, you're going to create different lengths of the phrase. You're going to create different rhythms and different places that it's going to resolve to create those rhythmic phrases. And you're also going to start moving more towards what you would want to be sounding like when you're improvising, coming up with variations on rhythms and through scales and arpeggios, and creating interesting ideas that are not always the same rhythm. So that's number 4, adding rest. And number 5 is to vary the way that you use the metronome by by decreasing the speed from where you want to practice in half and feeling the clicks in half notes, or decreasing it again by half and feeling the clicks in whole notes. And then, of course, there's many different layers at which you can challenge yourself beyond that, but I think that those are really great ones to start with and even to go a very long time with, because I find that even doing the whole notes or half notes can be challenging depending on the other variables of what I'm doing. So anyway, I hope that you found this helpful. If you did, I have a free course that I think you might enjoy. It's called Pentatonic Pathways, and it's available at my site, Practice Makes Better Music, and if you're not already watching there. It goes through the different pentatonic patterns and ways to connect between them, because I find that making the connections horizontally across the neck opens up my mind to a whole bunch of different ideas that I don't come up with when I'm just playing inside boxes. So I wanted to give you an approach to breaking out of some of the boxes that people get stuck in, that you might find yourself stuck in sometimes, and to move between and get more fluent on different areas of the neck. So that's available at my site, practicemakesbettermusic.com. So until next time, I appreciate you watching, and if you have any comments about what I talked about here, let me know. Any questions or any areas that you'd like me to go into greater depth on, I'd be happy. I would love to hear from you. So anyway, until next time, practice well and long, and practice smart also. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching.